And She Was Loved. Toni Morrison's Life in Stories is a picture book about the literary icon and Nobel Prize-winning author. It introduces children to one of the most influential and trailblazing writers of our lifetime. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book, and I'll talk with the author. Andrea Davis Pinkney is the New York Times bestselling and award-winning author of nearly 50 books for children and young adults, including The Red Pencil and Bird in a Box. She joins us to talk about her picture book, And She Was Loved, Toni Morrison's Life in Stories. Andrea, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here.
Now, in the book, you write about your love for the writing of Toni Morrison. So tell us a little bit about the impact her writing had on you and how that ultimately led to this poem and book.
Well, Toni Morrison's work and writing has always inspired me from the time I was really a young person. And the reason for that is that I grew up in a home where books were everywhere, and Toni Morrison's books were among the many. Of course, as a young child, many of the books were not for my young sensibility. But the thing that inspired me first were the book covers and seeing the cover of The Bluest Eye, and then being older and diving into that book. What I loved was that I was able to learn about Toni Morrison by reading about her as an author before reading her books as an older reader. And what I learned is that, like every child, Toni Morrison had a very active imagination. She would take a stick of chalk, draw on the sidewalk, swirl shapes and ideas. And I thought that was the beginning of creative expression for a great writer that touched so many people. And that was the inspiration for writing And She Was Loved, saying to young people, it all can start with that stick of chalk on the sidewalk.
So this is her life in stories. So what portion of her life does this cover?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about how I approached And She Was Loved. So it is a praise poem. It is a love letter. It is a thank you, and it's an invitation. It covers pretty much all of Toni Morrison's life, starting with her childhood. And that is where the praise poem begins. You know, we see young Toni in Ohio, and her name wasn't Toni Morrison. It was Chloe Wofford, which she later changed to Toni Morrison as her professional name, as the name that we see on many of her books. And the praise poem begins with her childhood. It takes us up through her young adulthood and through the many notable accomplishments that she had as an author that became just a global sensation and whose stories have endured.
So this is a picture book. So for what ages would you recommend it?
It is a picture book. The beauty of picture books is that they are for all ages. I would say And She Was Loved is a great read aloud, beginning for young people as young as age 6 and going up through adulthood. They always say one of the best kept secrets about a picture book is that we all love them no matter how old we are.
And I want to talk with you more about that in just a moment, but would you read a portion of the book for us to give people a flavor of what they'll find here?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, And She Was Loved is somewhat of an invitation. So many books invite us to read the story, and She Was Loved invites us to be the story. So the way in which it's told, we, the reader, are talking to Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison is addressing the child in all of us. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of what I mean. So the book begins with us praising Toni Morrison. Oh, Toni Morrison, your love has lifted us to places untouched. You born with a roar for stories that speak. Oh, Toni Morrison, outspoken sparrow, speckle flecked wings alight, flying so high, you setting the sky on fire, free-spirited storyteller. Toni Morrison, you help us soar up, up, up through sacred pages, rising past this world's ugly ways. Your writing, fanciful, exuberant, dazzling, real. So that's us talking to Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison, in turn, talks to us like this. Now, child, invite your imagination. Dear one, dream with wide open eyes. When a stick of chalk fills your fingers, when Mama Muse visits you at twilight, when all you want to do is write, 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 make your mark, stitch your story. You are loved. And that refrain, you are loved, we are loved, she is loved, he is loved, they are loved. That is the stitching that walks throughout the story and that leads us in and invites us in.
Well, it's a beautiful book, from the prose that you provide to the illustrations that are also there, and we'll talk about that in a moment too. But you talked about how this is an introduction and an invitation for kids to learn about Toni Morrison. So why do you think it's important to introduce kids to Toni Morrison at a young age?
I think it's important to introduce young people to Toni Morrison because these young folks today, these are the writers of tomorrow. These are the storytellers of the future. And in introducing Toni Morrison's journey as a writer, we tell young people it can begin with you. That, as an author, I visit thousands of school children a year. I'm in hundreds of schools and libraries and community centers. And I always start by asking the kids, raise your hand if you love to write your stories down. And all the hands go up and they're waving. Raise your hand if you love to just make up stories and imagine things in your mind, and all the hands go up. I say, raise your hand if you like to draw pictures, and all the hands go up. And that's how Toni Morrison began, dreaming, writing, drawing, and raising her hand.
I'm talking with Andrea Davis Pinkney about And She Was Loved, Toni Morrison's life and stories. And our conversation will continue. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. Now, as you mentioned, a good picture book can reach all ages. And often with picture books, it's an adult that's reading to the child. So do you kind of keep that adult audience in mind too as you're crafting a book?
When I'm crafting a book, I'm really keeping all readers in mind. And my job as an author is to really reach out a hand and to say, come along, reader, no matter how old you are. Here we are going to come on a journey. And if I'm doing my job as an author, the reader will come along, the reader will join me on the journey, and after a while, you may not even know you're reading. You may not even know you're in a book because you are so having such a great time in this exploration and in this journey. And again, the beauty of a picture book is that it's something that can be shared. And oftentimes adults will share a book with a child that has pictures in it. There's that precious moment when a child is hearing the story read from a grown-up's point of view, hearing the voice of a loved one, a caregiver. And it's the joy and power of picture books. And how many times have we sat with those young people and had a child say, read it again. I want to hear it again. And a picture book is the great candle to a wonderful read aloud.
I can't help but draw the parallel between you talking about Toni Morrison and her artful expression and how kids like to draw, but they also like to tell stories. And a picture book is a combination of those two things. You have your beautiful text, and you also have these gorgeous illustrations. Tell us about the illustrator.
Daniel Minter. Daniel Minter, Caldecott honor-winning artist, is the illustrator of And She Was Loved. And I want to say I feel especially blessed to have collaborated with Daniel on this book. Daniel's paintings, each illustration is its own exploration of Toni Morrison's life and times and storytelling. Each page invites us in. So, what Daniel has done is Daniel has created a kaleidoscope of bold, powerful images that are like a mosaic. And what I'm especially drawn to, as many of us are, is the cover of the book. If you look at young Toni Morrison, she is gazing right at us. She's saying, come along, come along. Here is my life. Here are my times. Here is my journey. Here is my expression. And I'm going to tell you a little secret. If you peel back the cover of the book, the paper dust jacket of the book, a surprise is revealed. I won't tell you what it is, but I say, readers, that is the joy and power of a picture book, when you see that every aspect of it is used to tell a story. And also there, if you look at the end papers, as soon as you open the book, there is Toni Morrison gazing at us. So we see young Toni as a child, then we see Toni Morrison as a grown-up, and the illustrations are a fanciful exploration of all that she brought to us.
Your book also presents a lot of information in the back matter of the book. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but also want to note that the artist's note, he says that Toni Morrison influenced his art. So it's not just her influencing would-be authors, but also influencing artists as well.
That's right. Toni Morrison was such a visual storyteller. She drew from the oral tradition of Black people. And there's so much rhythm in that. There's so much syncopation. There's so much musicality. And that inspires the visual. And if you look at Daniel's art, there's rhythm, musicality, syncopation, and each illustration, it's almost like Daniel's paintings are telling a story that is not set in the words. He's taking us to yet an entirely new level that we can look at and enjoy. The other thing I'll say is that young people, kids, are very visual. A lot of young folks today, they're spending a lot of time on their screens. And the beauty of a picture book is that it's saying, look at this, look at these pages. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can enter an experience, and you can enjoy it again and again.
And another way this book reaches out to older readers and adults is in that back matter, because you have a lot of information about Toni Morrison. Tell us about what they'll find there.
So I love back matter. I'm a big fan of back matter. And back matter is the information at the very, very end of the book, in which there is a list of Toni Morrison's most notable titles. There is information about her as a writer, her career working in publishing, so many of her accomplishments. There's information about films about Toni Morrison. So, we start with the book, we learn about her childhood, we learn about the influences, and for those of us who want more information, they can read the back matter, explore, and discover.
Besides being an introduction to Toni Morrison for kids, what do you hope kids are going to take away from this book?
I really hope that when young people read And She Was Loved, they will think, wow, look at Toni Morrison's work and look how it started. I like stories. I like pictures. Maybe I can tell my own stories. And I hope it will encourage young people to, when they get a book, look what's on the front. There is a name on that cover. The name on that cover is the name of an author. The name on that cover is the name of an illustrator. Maybe my name can go on the front of that book, because I love to tell stories, and I love to shout them, and I love to share them.
Well, your name has been on the front of many, many books for children. What is it you enjoy about writing for kids?
Dan, there's so much that I enjoy about writing for young people, but I think some of the main joys for me are the fact that children have a deep desire to unlock curiosity about themselves and the world. And that's what books do. So when I'm out on the road and I meet young Jimmy, And Jimmy tells me, you know what? I learned about the galaxy by reading a book. Or Katie tells me, I learned about history from reading a book. Or a child in Brooklyn tells me they enjoyed reading about a child in Botswana from reading a book. And the child in Botswana tells me that they learned about a child in Brooklyn from reading a book. So it's why I love to write for young people, because they discover, they travel, and their imagination grows and prospers.
Well, this is a beautiful book, so congratulations on having it out in the world now. What's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I've just had the great fun and the great pleasure of recording the audio for And She Was Loved. And it was a great time doing a read aloud. So the audio book for And She Was Loved is available. And that was my latest and my newest venture. I'm excited for people to take a listen and read along with the book itself and enjoy.
The book is And She Was Loved, Toni Morrison's Life in Stories by Andrea Davis Pinkney. Andrea, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you, Dan.
If you would like to purchase And She Was Loved, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.